We're essentially time traveling through this stack of sources. We aren't just reading a diary. We're tracking the trajectory of the early 21st century through one very specific lens.
And man, does that lens change. We're going to see how the political optimism or maybe anxiety of the early 2000s just curdled into something else entirely.
hmm And we'll watch technology go from this is going to save us all to, well,
To this is burying us in slop.
exactly. And perhaps most interestingly, we're going to look at a really radical theory about how our brains actually process freedom. It gets into the black box of the mind, spirituality, and creativity.
Okay, so we have a lot to unpack. What's our roadmap for this deep dive?
Well, we're going to organize this logically. We'll start with the hard reality, politics and world affairs. We have sources from 2003 and 2022 that draw a straight line from the Bush administration to, well, to the modern political landscape. Then we're moving to what the source calls the Great Delusions, specifically about energy, sustainability, and the fantasy of Mars colonization.
And for all the creatives listening, musicians, artists, stick around because the second half is going to hit close to home. We're talking AI music, the slop era, and why constraints might actually be the key to freedom.
Finally, we'll land in the deep end. We'll discuss the black box of the brain, the debate between free will and biological determinism, and a personality type the source identifies in 2026 called the autrovert.
Autrovert. I had never heard that term before reading these notes, and I love it. But okay, let's start with the heavy hitters. Politics and history. When you line up the entry from February 18th, 2003, next to the one from February 18th, 2022, the contrast is, well, it's jarring.
It is, but the source makes a compelling argument that it's not just contrast, it's a continuum. Let's look at February 18, 2003. The source is writing during the lead up to the Iraq War,
Right.
and there was this concept floating around the Bush White House called the unitary executive theory.
Okay, break that down for us. That sounds like some heavy legal jargon.
It is, but the implications are huge. I mean, basically, it's a constitutional theory that claims the president possesses the power to control the entire executive branch, total consolidation.
Okay.
The source argues that while people today focus on the chaos of the Trump years, the architecture for that power was actually built back in 2003.
So the argument is that the unitary executive was the seed, and everything we saw later, the populism, the overreach, that was just the tree growing.
Precisely. The source notes that back in 2003, there was this fear that other nations were becoming the 51st state, culturally and politically. They list Poland and Turkey.
And what's eerie is that in the February 18th, 2022 entry, Poland comes back.
It comes back, but not as a copy of America. It comes back as a warning.
A warning. How, I mean, usually when we talk about Poland in the U.S., it's about tourism or NATO or something.
The source points to the Law and Justice Party in Poland PS. They describe how this party managed to capture the judiciary and turn public media into a propaganda arm. The source calls it a flashing red warning light for the U.S. They're basically saying, look, this is what a ruthless, efficient seizure of state institutions looks like in a modern democracy.
It's interesting because, usually Americans look at European politics as this distant, quirky thing, but the source is saying, no, this is the blueprint.
Right. It's the exemplar for what the source calls the new right. And this connects to a broader theme about the loss of stability. There's a reflection on a book called The Big Sort and the Legacy of Reaganism.
That was the entry where they called Reagan the first nail in the coffin, right? That felt pretty heavy-handed.
It is a sharp critique, but look at the context. The source admits they personally benefited from the tail end of that stable post-war era, but they express this deep guilt that Gen Xers and millennials didn't get that same deal. The argument is that the dismantling of functional government, which they trace back to Reagan, it removed the floor that younger generations are now trying to stand on.
And when the floor is gone, your memory of what the building looked like starts to get fuzzy. Which brings us to my absolute favorite analogy in this whole stack of papers, the forest fire of history. This is from February 18th, 2021.
This is such a profound way to think about how we process the past. The source asks us to imagine a community that burns down in a massive forest fire. The physical structures, the houses, photo albums, street signs are all gone. But the people who live there are still alive, so the memory exists. They can tell you where the bakery was.
But then inevitably those people die.
Right, and that's the forest fire moment for history. The source argues we are living through that moment now where the direct witnesses are fading away.
So when we look back at the 1980s or 90s,
We aren't rebuilding on a foundation of truth. We're building on what they call quicksand.
They call it a remix, right? Like, younger generations are nostalgic for an 80s that never actually existed.
Yeah.
They're nostalgic for the aesthetic, not the reality.
Exactly, because the reality burned down. So you have this cultural isolation where we're confident about what happened, but we're really just relying on what the internet says happened. And this isolation isn't just about time, it's about space.
This is the wall in the head concept. Mauer im Kopf.
A German concept, yeah, usually about the Berlin Wall. But the source applies it to American suburbia. They talk about growing up in 1950s Chicago, the fences, the manicured lawns.
It sounds idyllic on paper, the American dream, but the source describes it as a kind of psychological prison.
Because it prioritizes separation. The source contrasts it with the Loop in downtown Chicago, where humanity is all mashed together. The suburban design creates a wall in the head, a barrier where you stop seeing your neighbors as part of your organism.
But they're seeing them as other.
Exactly. And once you have that wall in your head, it's easy to project things onto people, or onto entire countries, which pivots us to the international stage, February 18th, 2022, right before the Ukraine invasion escalated.
Right.
The source asks a crucial question about Russia. Is Vladimir Putin some brilliant strategist playing 4D chess?
And the answer is a hard no.
A very hard no. The source argues we give autocrats too much credit for strategy when they're actually just driven by grievance.
So it's personal.
It's deeply personal. The source believes Putin isn't calculating geopolitical leverage. He's trying to avenge the rise of perestroika. For him, Ukraine isn't a tactical asset. It's the crown jewel that was stolen.
So it's not geopolitics, it's psychology. A delusion of grandeur.
It's always psychology, just like the entry on the Texas power crisis from February 18, 2021.
The grid failure. I remember watching that on the news, the whole state freezing over.
The source was watching it too, but they were comparing it to their own experience in Texas way back in 1989. They argue that the 2021 collapse wasn't just about a cold snap or climate change. It was about the illusion of infrastructure.
What does that mean? Illusion of infrastructure.
Well, think about the narrative of Texas for the last decade. Low taxes, business-friendly, come on down.
Sure.
It triggered a massive migration. But the source argues the state didn't build the infrastructure to handle that boom. They sold the image of a functioning, robust state while the grid itself was fragile. It's the stress of migration crashing into a system held together with duct tape.
We keep seeing this pattern in the notes. We prefer the fantasy to the reality. And the ultimate fantasy, Mars.
The Miles from Mars entry. This one is scathing.
I felt a little attacked reading this one, I'll be honest. I love the idea of space travel, but the source does not share my enthusiasm.
Well, they don't hate space exploration. They hate the delusion of colonization. They compare the Martian landscape to the Mojave Desert. Because it looks like a desert on Earth, our brains trick us into thinking, oh, we can handle that.
But the reality is...
The reality is radiation, toxic soil, bone density loss. The source says living on Mars would be like living with the life expectancy of a 16th century peasant, but with worse scenery.
And they take a shot at the marketing. The whole SpaceX comparing their rockets to Boeing 737s.
It's a trick, right? It hides the claustrophobic, lethal reality of the endeavor. And the source connects this back to the face on Mars from the Viking mission in '76.
The pile of rocks that look like a face.
Exactly. We saw a face because we are hardwired to see faces. And the source argues we are doing the same thing with the planet itself. We are projecting a Plan B Earth onto a dead rock because we're desperate for a backup.
So we're deluding ourselves about Mars and we're stressed about Earth. Let's jump to the future. The entries from 2025 and 2026. This is where the source starts messing around with AI music.
This is a major pivot. The source is a musician, clearly. And in 2025, they admit that AI solves a big problem, the murky strategies of production. You don't have to fiddle with knobs for hours. You get a result.
But then they use this word, swap.
It's a perfect descriptor, isn't it? The source describes wading through hours of AI-generated music. It's technically competent, but the chord changes are boring. It's a river of mediocrity.
But here's the weird part, the earworm effect. Even though the music is slop, they found themselves wanting to hear it again. Why?
Repetition. The source compares it to AM radio in the 70s. It didn't matter if the song was good. If you heard it 10 times a day, it became the soundtrack of your life. The AI process requires you to listen to these little snippets over and over.
So you're not falling in love with the art, you're being conditioned.
It's Pavlovian, and it forces the question, is art about the output or the intent? The source struggles with this in the entry on political songwriting. They reference Sting and Peter Gabriel, calling music sacred ground.
They argue most political songs fail because they get anonymized.
Right. When you try to make a song about a cause, you often strip away the humanity to make it fit a slogan. The source thinks this is profane. They prefer the approach where the art stands alone and the politics is the context, not the lyric.
This tension between the individual and the crowd is everywhere. There's that story about the photography group in Chicago.
The Bean Incident. This is from February 18th, 2021. The source watches 100 photographers standing around Cloudgate the Bean, taking the exact same picture.
It's group creativity.
Which the source argues is an oxymoron.
Yeah.
It's conformity. They're finding comfort in taking the photo that's already been approved by the algorithm.
Right.
Contrast that with the source's mention of the Hipstamatic app,
Yeah.
or that film about Indian children given cameras.
I loved that detail. The kids were given cameras with no settings, just a button.
And the source argues that constraint is what unlocked the flow. When you remove the technical options, you are forced to just see. We think we want infinite options, but real creativity comes from having almost no options at all.
Speaking of constraints, we have to talk about the shorts box. February 18th, 2024. The source brings up the movie Mommy.
A brilliant film by Xavier Dolan, shot in a 1.1 aspect ratio, a perfect square.
Which is incredibly claustrophobic for a movie.
It is, but the source uses it to explain what social media is doing to us. We are compressing our lives into portrait mode. When you shoot vertical video, you are literally cropping out the periphery. You lose the context.
So we're editing our reality to fit the box.
And when you lose the landscape, you lose the truth. It's a tunnel vision that we are voluntarily adopting.
Okay, we've looked at the screen, now let's look behind it, into the brain. The black box. This is from 2021, and it feels like the philosophical core of this whole thing.
This draws heavily on Jungian psychology. The source makes a distinction between composition and performance. Composition is Apollonian.
The Greek god of logic and order.
Right. It's analytical, it's safe, it's planning. But performance, improvisation, that is Dionysian. Chaos and wine and surrender.
So what is the black box?
The source theorizes that when you are truly improvising, music, conversation, whatever your frontal lobe, the part that worries about what people think, it actually deactivates. You're drawing from a subliminal space. If you're healthy, it's a white box. If you have trauma, it might be a black box.
And you have no control over what comes out of it.
That's the scary part. And this connects to the free will debate in the February 18th, 2024 notes. They reference Daniel Dennett and Robert Sapolsky.
The heavy hitters of the free will debate.
Dennett says we have agency. Sapolsky says we are biological robots. The source uses music to bridge them. They argue you use your free will, the Dennett part, to practice, to sit in the chair and run the scales.
But when it's time to play...
You have to surrender to the robot, the Sapolsky part. You have to let the hardwiring take over.
So freedom isn't about control. It's about preparation for surrender.
Precisely. Which brings us to the introvert.
2026, what is an introvert?
It's a term from a book by Ronnie Kaminsky. We know introverts and extroverts, but an introvert is defined by indifference to the tribe.
Indifference. That sounds a little cold.
Not cold liberated, the source realizes they just don't care. They don't care about the conspiracy theories, the political cults, the desperate need to belong to a team. The source argues that most people are terrified of freedom. It's lonely. So they flock to tribes for safety.
But the introvert is okay with being alone.
The introvert is busy with their own black box. They're occupied. And the source connects this to the ancient Gnostics and Hermeticists.
The alchemists.
Right. The Hermeticists didn't separate science and art. They integrated them. And the source laments that instead of evolving into that integrated state, society is regressing. We're going back to reptilian modes, fighting, building walls, joining cults.
We're regressing because we're scared of the silence, scared of the blank screen, which leads to the final and I think most powerful image in the notes, the CRT monitor.
Yeah, from February 18th, 2021. If you remember those old heavy monitors, you know about burn-in. If you left a static image on the screen too long, it would physically burn into the glass. Even when the machine was off, you could see the ghost.
And the source says this is a metaphor for the ego.
Yes. The burn-in image is your brand. It's how the world sees you. It's the static identity you project. I'm a lawyer, I'm a mother, I'm a Democrat. It's fixed.
But the stream...
The stream is consciousness. The stream is the content playing when the monitor is actually on. The source argues that to self-actualize, you have to keep the stream moving. If you stop, you just become that ghost image burned into the glass.
That's heavy. But it ties it all together. The unitary executive is a burned-in political image. The wall in the head is a burned-in social image. The slop of AI is just static.
And the way out, be an introvert, practice your scales so you can surrender to the improvisation. Don't let the image burn in.
I want to leave you with one final thought from the source's collection of aphorisms. They call them dynaxioms. They wrote, awareness has nothing to do with intellect.
Meaning, you can be the smartest person in the room, know all the history of Poland, the physics of Mars, and still be completely asleep.
Awareness is about seeing the context, not just the content. So as you go about your day, look at the screen of your own life. Is the movie playing? Or are you just staring at the ghost image burned into the glass? Thanks for diving in with us.
See you next time.